This is TWiT.
I do worry, though, and I bet you worry, too. One of the problems with being a police officer is you see the worst of humanity and pretty much colors your perception of the world. Has that happened to you?
Yeah. I mean, I have, my entire career has been dealing with people trying to cause harm. I mean,
how did you start in this? I'm eager for that kind of context.
So I started in the 80s when my Santa Claus brought me a Commodore 64 when I believe I was 7 or 8 years old, and a 300 baud modem. And so I did a lot of stuff as a kid and teenager that for which the statute of limitations has run out.
You're happy to say, I might add.
Yeah. And then, but I was fortunate, went to I grew up in Sacramento, the Midwest of California, which means I can both ski and duck hunt, right? That's how you can tell. Went to like a nice public high school in Sacramento, was able to go to Cal, did electrical engineering, studied under Dave Patterson, kind of famous guy, who did some incredible work, and then was able to get a career doing legit stuff. So, I had the economic opportunities and the educational opportunities that if I was growing up in Poland or, an ex-Soviet state at the same time, would not have had.
You'd be in a ransomware gang.
I'd be wearing Adidas tracksuits.
Yeah. I see that so much, and maybe it's your generation. Maybe the younger generation won't be like this, but I think of people like Kevin Mitnick, who took a career as a hacker and made a career as a security professional. Yeah. That seems to be the usual career path.
Well, it's a fun one because you can go and actually hack stuff all day and then get paid and not go to jail, right? You can go home at night and have a family and a real life and not live, not live day to day thinking you're going to get
What is it that attracts, though, your mind to that penetrating systems?
Yeah, I mean, it's just fun to break things, right? Like it's fun to. I like doing security, both attack and defense. Like, I really enjoy doing incident response. When it's not my incident, I really enjoy it as a consultant. It's less fun when you're a CISO.
It's like forensics. It's like you're the guy who comes in, there's a murder scene. Right. You got to solve it.
Right, yeah. I mean, I bet if you ask cops, they could never say this publicly, but privately, they're like, I kind of like being a murder detective.
Yeah.
Right? It sucks that somebody died, but like they enjoy the work. So fortunately, generally people aren't dying when we're talking about it. Something bad's happened and you get to investigate and understand, and unlike other forms of engineering, you have an adversary, right? So like you build the Golden Gate Bridge, your adversary is earthquakes and corrosion and wind, right? Non-intelligent things that you figure out how, and you build the bridge and then you're like, okay, we're done, right? You never build a bridge in security. You're playing chess. And whatever you do, you can't just read a bunch of books and play the perfect chess game. Your opponents always get better. And so I always found that from an attacker and defender perspective, it's a lot of fun to be playing against real people.
That's how Cliff Stoll
how about the psychology
in the Cuckoo's Egg.
Yeah.
That was what that whole book was about.
It's a great book.
We talked to Bill Cheswick, same thing. He was just an innocent, engineer who had to solve a problem, built, the first honeypot, and that's how you get into it. Yeah. But I bet because the human mind loves solving problems, these are some of the best, most interesting problems because it's a human adversary.
Right. I mean, if we were growing up in classical Rome, you'd have to be a philosopher or solve math or, a philosopher or whatever they called scientists. It's like, but if you grew up in the latter 20th, early 21st century and you want to pull things apart and figure out how they work, hacking's a pretty good way to do it.
These days it's the
But you're also hacking into the human brain.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I've always wondered
psychology
about
involved.
Matt Cutts, our friend Matt Cutts, dealing with, spam. You'd think he'd be just a growly, nasty, miserable person, and he's the nicest person I practically know. And how does it affect, because you're interested in both the engineering part of it, but also the human part of it,
right?
And seeing this part of humanity always, trying to be a step ahead of you. Does it ever get you down? Yeah,
well, so I mean, that's the change I made in my career. So before I joined Yahoo, I was just pure InfoSec, right? So I was a professional hacker. I worked as a consultant. I started my own consulting company. We did a lot of work for Microsoft. So if you remember those early trustworthy computing days, I spent a bunch of the early days of our marriage and several years up in Redmond breaking Microsoft products. And that's what I did.
That. Yeah.
And so, I did kind of just pure InfoSec, right? Which is about the programs, it's about the bugs, it's about the computers. And then when I joined Yahoo, obviously that was a huge part of my job. A huge part of it is, in any executive position, is just human management, right? One of the challenges with Yahoo is it was a very important company that was dying, right? And by the time I got there, they hadn't had a CISO for about 18 months.
They'd already, and we want to make this clear because I misstated this last week, they'd already had that billion user breach.
That's right.
That was in the history. That was in the past.
We did have a breach.
You had to clean up. You had to clean it up.
Right. So that billion user breach was something that we figured out was likely, but we never figured out the root cause.
Right.
Partially because Yahoo didn't have any logging at all, effectively. We had figured out because when I got there, the number one security problem was there's a massive account takeover issue.
Yes.
And so we did.
I remember that.
Yeah. And people
all
get their Yahoo accounts getting taken over
all the time,
and then spammed.
Yep.
And it seemed to me, just from all my consulting work, this is totally statistically improbable compared to every other company.
People would call the radio show all the time. My Yahoo email's been taken over. Yeah. They're sending out spam, asking for money.
Yeah.
How did this happen?
Right. And so I asked my team, hey, I want you to do a statistical analysis of these accounts, and I gave them a bunch of cuts I wanted them to take. And we had this young lady who was an intern at the time, is now a lawyer. She went to law school, and she does great work. And I got to run into her professionally. It was just really cool. And she did all this data science of just cutting all the data. And one of the most interesting graphs was if you looked at the date of last password change for the accounts that were taken over. It was like this, and then there was a super drop-off.
Yeah.
And when you looked at that graph, that drop-off happened at the exact month. The resolution was only to the month, so we couldn't do to the day. The exact month that Yahoo had changed the way that passwords were stored. And so that was a pretty clear indication that there had been a breach of the older system. And this had happened before, over a year before I had gone to Yahoo, that there was a change in how passwords are stored and secured, that when that happened, they had closed a vulnerability that somebody had used. Now, we didn't have actual logs of how the data was stolen. We didn't have direct evidence. And so when we took this to Marissa and the other executive team, from their perspective, is like, can you prove it? And my answer is no. It's just highly suggestive evidence. And from their perspective, they're like, okay, well, we're not going to disclose anything because you can't prove anything, right? And at that time, Marissa, if you remember, Marissa took over because of an activist investor. By the time I joined, it was like a year and a half after she'd been there. The honeymoon was over. She had her own activist investor who was now pushing them to make money. She didn't want any kind of negative publicity at all. And so my relationship with her was mostly just her saying, can you absolutely totally prove something is true?
You're always the bad news guy, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what sucks about being a CISO, right? I would literally walk into a room at either Yahoo or Facebook, and people would be like, oh, Stamos is here.
Yeah. Hey, folks, I'm Ant Pruitt, and I have a question for you. How do you think your hardworking team, with a Club TWiT corporate subscription plan, of course, show your appreciation and reward your tech team with a subscription to Club TWiT? Keep everyone informed and entertained with podcasts covering the latest in tech. With the Club TWiT subscription, they get access to all of our podcasts ad-free. And they also get access to our members-only Discord, access to exclusive outtakes and behind-the-scenes footage and special content like the fireside chats that I enjoy hosting. Plus, they also get shows like Hands on Mac, Hands on Windows, and the Untitled Linux Show. So, go to twit.tv/clubtwit and look for corporate plans for complete details.